human worlds asunder, cutting them off from one another, leaving them isolated, vulnerable, and alone. Chaos reigned. Entire planets, once hubs of culture and science, descended into a bloody, superstitious barbarism. Others, less fortunate, were enslaved by alien conquerors, their populations becoming cattle for unspeakable horrors. It was a time of abject despair. It was an age where mankind, the species that had once claimed the stars as its birthright, seemed poised on the very brink of total, unlamented extinction. But from this suffocating darkness, a figure of light emerged. He was the emperor of mankind. For millennia, he had walked among humans, a secret shepherd, a hidden guardian, shaping the course of history from the deepest shadows. His goal, through all the ages of blood and fire, had remained singular, unwavering, and absolute: to unite the scattered diaspora of the galaxy under the single, golden banner of humanity. He sought to usher in a new, final age of reason, an age of order, and an age of enlightenment. To achieve this, at the moment of humanity's deepest need, the Emperor at last revealed himself. From the throne world of Terra, the ancient, scarred cradle of the human race, he launched the Great Crusade. This was a vast, galaxy-spanning military campaign, its sole purpose to find and reunite every lost human world, forging them all into a single, mighty Imperium. The Emperor was no ordinary man. He was, perhaps, the last true man, a being of immense, almost unimaginable psychic power. He was the greatest of all mankind's leaders, its most brilliant scientists, and its most terrible warriors, all combined into a single, golden, indomitable will. But even with his incredible, godlike abilities, he could not conquer the galaxy alone. To realize his grand vision, he undertook his greatest work. He created the Legions Astartes, superhuman warriors forged in secret laboratories from his own genetic material. These warriors, known to the galaxy as the Space Marines, were the finest soldiers the stars had ever seen. They were demigods of war, genetically enhanced to be stronger, faster, and more resilient than any mortal human. They knew no fear, they felt no pain, and they were loyal, it seemed, to a fault. Each of the 20 Space Marine legions was a vast army in its own right, and each was to be led by a Primarch, a son, created in the Emperor's own image. The Primarchs were more than just leaders. They were demigods of war, each one engineered to be perfect in both mind and body. Each of them represented a different, unique aspect of the Emperor's own multifaceted vision. Some were peerless warriors. Others were masterful diplomats, brilliant scientists, or pragmatic statesmen. They were not only generals, but living symbols of the Emperor's power, his ambition, and his legacy. Yet, the bond between them and their creator was intended to be more than that of warriors. They were a brotherhood tied by the very blood of their father and a shared, glorious purpose. The Emperor had forged them not just to lead his armies, but to share in and to build his dream of a united galaxy. Together, they would bring the Emperor's light, the light of imperial truth, to the darkest, most forsaken corners of the galaxy. The Great Crusade was a glorious, brutal, and seemingly unstoppable tide of conquest. World after world, system after system, fell before the organized might of the Imperium. Lost human colonies, wallowing in barbarism, were reclaimed and brought into the light of compliance. Xeno's empires, ancient and cruel, were shattered and crushed. Ancient technologies, lost to the darkness of the Age of Strife, were rediscovered and brought to heal. For 2 spectacular centuries, the Emperor's armies marched across the stars, a golden age reborn in fire and steel. It seemed as though nothing, no power in the heavens or hells, could stand in the way of humanity's final, manifest ascension. Amidst this galaxy-spanning war, one Primarch rose above all others. His name was Horus Lupercal. He was the first of the Primarchs to be found, the first of the lost sons to be reunited with their father. It was a moment the Emperor had long, and perhaps desperately, awaited. When Horus was discovered on the grim, industrial, gang-haunted world of Chthoniya, he immediately became the Emperor's closest confidant. From that first moment, their bond was deeper than that of a mere father and son. The Emperor saw in Horus the very pinnacle of his own potential. He saw a leader not only of warriors, but of humanity itself. Under the Emperor's personal, loving tutelage, Horus grew to be a peerless strategist and a brilliant tactician. His leadership of his legion, the Luna Wolves, became the stuff of legend. His victories piled high, each one more brilliant and decisive than the last. Horus was known and beloved for his unmatched charisma. He was a natural-born leader, a radiant sun, whose very presence could inspire his legion, and even his stern brother Primarchs, to acts of impossible loyalty and valor. While other Primarchs had their flaws, the simmering anger of Angron, the obsessive pride of Fulgrim, the cold cruelty of Kuz, Horus seemed to embody the very best of their father. He was not just a warrior, a killer of worlds. He was a diplomat, a leader who could bring together the disparate, warring elements of the Imperium and mold them, with a smile and a firm hand, into a cohesive, singular force. He was beloved by his legion, the Luna Wolves, who would follow him into any fire. His name spread throughout the burgeoning Imperium as the greatest, the most noble, the most perfect of the Emperor's sons. The pinnacle of Horus's rise, the zenith of his glory, came after the historic, crushing victory at Ullanor. This campaign was one of the largest, most arduous, and most critical of the entire Great Crusade. It was a test of the Imperium's absolute resolve against a powerful, entrenched Xenos empire of orcs, who threatened to undo all the progress the Crusade had made. Horus, given supreme command, led the Imperial forces with a brilliance that bordered on prophetic. When the dust finally settled, and the Orc warlord was slain, Ullanor stood as the single greatest triumph of the Great Crusade. To mark this victory in a grand triumph, the Emperor made a fateful, and perhaps fatal, decision. He named Horus the War Master. He was to be the supreme commander of all Imperial forces. This title, this honor, elevated Horus above all of his brothers, giving him an authority second only to the Emperor himself. The Emperor's decision, made in the bright, golden light of victory, would become one of the most influential and catastrophic choices of the Imperium's history. Though at that moment, he could not have known it. By appointing Horus as War Master, the Emperor was effectively and publicly handing over the reins of the Great Crusade. For reasons known only to himself, reasons of profound and terrible secrecy, the Emperor chose that moment to withdraw from the front lines of the battle. He announced his return to Terra, where he would focus on a secret project, a project of immense, world-altering importance. He left Horus to lead in his stead. It was an act of immense, almost blind trust, and in the eyes of many, it was a clear, unspoken acknowledgement of Horus's destiny as the Emperor's chosen heir. For Horus, this was both the greatest of honors and the most crushing of burdens. He had always been close to his father, his greatest student, his most ardent admirer. But the title of War Master came with an immense, isolating responsibility. Now, he was not just a brother, he was their leader. While some of his brothers, like the noble Sanguinius or the stoic Rogel Dorn, accepted his new authority without question, others did not. Primarchs like Lorgar or the bitter and brilliant Perturabo harbored a quiet, simmering resentment. Horus was no longer just one of them. He had been set apart, elevated by the Emperor's singular, unquestionable will. The burden of leadership, of command over 1,000,000 armies, of settling the disputes of his own prideful demigod brothers began to weigh heavily upon him. And in the quiet, lonely hours on the bridge of his flagship, doubts, for the first time in his life, started to creep into his mind. Though Horus's rise seemed like the perfect, glorious fulfillment of the Emperor's dream, it in fact sowed the first bitter seeds of division among the Primarchs. The bond of brotherhood, that shining chain that had held the Primarchs together, was never as strong, never as flawless as it appeared. Each of them, though united in a common purpose, have been shaped by vastly different experiences, different worlds, and different, deeply held values. Some, like Robert Guilliman, embraced the Emperor's vision of an ordered, rational, enlightened Imperium. Others, like the tragically broken Angron or the haunted, dark-minded Conrad Cuz, had always harbored darker, more violent thoughts, shaped by the brutal, savage worlds they had been raised on. Even the closest of the brothers harbored rivalries, petty jealousies, and ancient, unspoken grudges, though most would never have dared admit it. With Horus elevated to War Master, these divisions, these hairline cracks in the Brotherhood, grew more pronounced. The Emperor had placed him in command of the entire Great Crusade, but some of his brothers deeply resented being led by one they considered, at best, an equal. Others felt slighted, wounded in their pride, wondering why they had not been chosen instead. Lorgar, in particular, who had always, desperately, worshipped the Emperor as a literal, living god, felt betrayed by this, and by the Emperor's subsequent withdrawal. The cracks in the great, golden facade of the Brotherhood widened, and unseen, malevolent forces began to exploit them. It was not just the other Primarchs who felt the weight of Horus's new, heavy mantle. Horus himself, the War Master, began to struggle with a profound, gnawing doubt. The unending burden of the Great Crusade, combined with the Emperor's sudden, echoing absence, left him feeling increasingly, painfully, isolated. He had always been able to turn to his father for guidance, for a word of comfort, or for a shared moment of triumph. But now, the Emperor was distant. He was silent. He was locked away on Terra, consumed by his own secretive, all-important work. Horus's feelings of abandonment, of being left to carry an impossible weight alone, grew with every passing day. And into this void, this silence, whispers began to reach him. Whispers of another way, a path not of blind, unquestioning service to a distant, silent father, but of power, true power for himself. These whispers, though subtle at first, would lead Horus, the War Master, the favored son, down a dark, nightmarish path from which there would be no return. As the Great Crusade pushed ever forward, the galaxy seemed poised for its final, glorious unification. But beneath the surface, beneath the triumphant parades and the compliant worlds, a terrible storm was brewing. The seeds of doubt, of pride, and of jealousy, planted deep within the hearts of the Primarchs, would soon bear a bitter, poisonous fruit. Horus, the Emperor's most beloved, most favored son, would soon face a choice that would determine the very fate of the Imperium. The title of War Master, once a symbol of ultimate honor, would soon become a terrible, galaxy-dooming curse. For Horus was being drawn, step by insidious step, into a conspiracy that would tear the Imperium and the very fabric of reality apart. The galaxy had been united by a war of hope. Soon, it would be torn asunder by a war of betrayal. In the endless, black, churning void between worlds, something ancient and malevolent stirred. For uncounted eons, the Chaos Gods had lurked in the Immaterium. They were unseen, unknowable, and infinitely patient, waiting for their time. The warp, that roiling, psychic realm of pure emotion and raw thought made manifest, was their domain. And they, in turn, were the gods of that raw, untamed emotion. Khorne, the blood god, the god of war, rage, and anger. Tsench, the architect of fate, the god of change, deception, and twisted ambition. Nurgle, the lord of decay, the god of despair, plague, and stagnation. And Slaanesh, the dark prince, the god of excess, pleasure, and sensation. The material world, the galaxy of mortals, was their playground. And for millennia, they had twisted the hearts of mortals to their dark will, shaping entire civilizations, breeding cults, and fostering corruption and deceit. The Great Crusade, this shining, golden juggernaut of reason, threatened their very dominion. The Emperor, with his grand, cold vision of a united, rational galaxy, sought to banish the influence of the warp forever. His imperial truth was a doctrine of atheism, a law that declared, on pain of death, that gods did not exist, that mankind had no need for faith or superstition. To the Chaos Gods, this was an intolerable, existential threat. They could not allow the Emperor to succeed. His empire of reason would deny them the very essence of their existence. It would starve them of the fear, the ambition, the hatred, and the despair that gave them form and power. And so, with a singular, malevolent purpose, they turned their collective, baleful eyes to his most beloved son, Horus Lupercal. Horus was the linchpin of the Emperor's dream. His strength, his charisma, his unbending loyalty, his very presence was the bedrock upon which the new Imperium was being built. But within the cracks of Horus's magnificent soul, Chaos saw its opportunity. For all his power, for all his greatness, Horus harbored doubts. He harbored fears, and, most dangerously of all, he harbored a deep, burning ambition. The Chaos Gods, masters of deceit, began to whisper into these cracks, seeking to break the favored son of the Emperor. They would use those closest to him, those who had already, in secret, fallen under their dark sway, to plant the final, poisonous seeds of betrayal. The Word-bearers, the legion led by the Primarch Lorgar, had long since, in secret, turned to the worship of chaos. Lorgar, spurned by the Emperor for his unwelcome religious devotion, for the burning of his perfect city, Monarchia, had sought new, more appreciative gods to worship. And in the dark, forbidden places of the galaxy, he had found them. His most trusted lieutenant, the first chaplain Erebus, had been instrumental in this dark fall. And now, Erebus was the knife in the dark. He was the unseen, whispering hand that would guide and tip Horus toward his final, terrible treachery. The stage for this grand, tragic fall was set on a desolate, unremarkable world named Davin. It was here that Horus would come face to face and soul to soul with the dark, ancient powers that sought to claim him. The campaign on Davin should have been a routine compliance. It was a world of little strategic significance, a mere way station in the relentless path of the Great Crusade. But in the deep, humid, fever-ridden swamps of the planet, Horus would find more than a simple, easy victory. The Davinites, the human population of the world, had fallen under the sway of chaos long before the Imperium's arrival. Their primitive, shamanistic religion worshipped the dark powers of the warp, though they masked it cunningly in the guise of nature gods and ancestral spirits. Erebus, the dark architect, seeing his moment, convinced Horus that this planet's minor uprising needed to be crushed personally, that the War Master himself, as a show of force, should lead the assault. The battle was, as expected, swift. The Luna Wolves, in their element, were overwhelming, crushing the Davinite forces with ease. But when Horus, in his moment of triumph, confronted the rebel leader in the planet's Serpent Lodge, a hidden, terrible power revealed itself. Horus was struck down, not by a mortal weapon, not by a lost bolt or a chain word, but by the dark, forbidden sorcery of the Lodge. A cursed, ancient blade, an anatheme, wielded by a Davinite priest, plunged deep into his flesh. And the War Master, the demigod, the son of the Emperor, fell grievously wounded. His body was taken, in panic, back to his flagship, the Vengeful Spirit. But the wound would not heal. The poison was not of the material realm. His mind, his soul, lingered on the very edge of death. It was Erebus who intervened at this critical, desperate moment. He convinced the grieving, desperate inner circle of the Luna Wolves, Horus's Mournival, to bring their Primarch back to the Serpent Lodge. He claimed, with all his false piety, that the priests there, the very ones who had wounded him, held the ancient, shamanistic power to heal the War Master. Desperate, and with no other options, the Legion complied. Horus was brought back to the dark, foul-smelling lodge. And there, within the dark, corrupted heart of Davin's corruption, the Chaos Gods made their move. As Horus lay unconscious, his soul balanced on a knife's edge, his mind was plunged into a deep, profound, and terrifying nightmare. The Chaos Gods spoke to him. They spoke in visions, crafting a world of intricate, believable illusions, designed specifically to break his will. They showed him a future in which the Emperor ruled, not as a benevolent, enlightened father, but as a cold, distant, unfeeling tyrant. Horus saw a galaxy 10,000 years from now, where the Emperor sat immobile, a corpse upon a golden throne. He was distant, uncaring, ruling over a decaying, stagnant Imperium. This Imperium of mankind, once so vibrant, so dynamic, had stagnated. Its people, his people, lived in abject, superstitious fear. Its rulers were corrupted by a vast, unthinking bureaucracy. Its worlds lay in ruin, beset by endless war. In this dark, terrible future, the Emperor no longer led humanity. He was locked away on Terra, a god in all but name, worshipped by trillions as a distant, unreachable, and demanding deity. The Great Crusade, his life's work, was long over. But its promise, its dream of reason, was unfulfilled, betrayed. The Emperor's grand vision, the imperial truth, had collapsed under its own weight. The galaxy had become a place of blind, brutal repression, of unthinking dogma, and of endless, grinding, meaningless war. Horus, the Emperor's greatest, most loyal son, saw himself cast aside, his name, his achievements forgotten. He saw his brothers, once so noble, so proud, reduced to squabbling, forgotten warlords. The Chaos Gods spoke to him, their voices honeyed, reasonable, and filled with a terrible, false sympathy. They told Horus that the Emperor had always planned this future, that the Emperor sought not the betterment of mankind, but his own ascension to godhood. They twisted the truth, showing him tantalizing, out-of-context glimpses of the Emperor's secret webway project on Terra. They presented it as a work that would see the Emperor rise above and abandon even his own primarchs. In this future, they whispered, the Emperor had abandoned his sons. He had abandoned the ideals of the Great Crusade. He sought only power, absolute and divine, for himself. In the depths of his soul, his spirit trapped in this nightmare, Horus raged. He had given everything to the Emperor. He had fought beside him. He had bled for him. He had loved him. And now, he was to be discarded. His life's work a mere stepping stone for his father's selfish ambition. His loyalty, his boundless love for his father, curdled. It twisted into a deep, bitter, and profound bitterness. The Chaos Gods, sensing the moment, offered him a choice. Submit to the Emperor's coming tyranny, or rise against him. They told him that with their power, he could free humanity from the Emperor's iron grip. He could usher in a new, true age, where mankind would no longer be slaves to a distant, demanding god. They would be free, and they would rule the stars under Horus's command. He would be the master of the galaxy. He would be the true savior of humanity. Erebus, the traitor priest who had guided this dark, shamanistic ritual, appeared within Horus's vision, his face a mask of false friendship. He spoke of the great, raw powers beyond the material world, of gods older and more powerful than the upstart emperor. He revealed the truth of chaos, the power that could reshape reality itself. All Horus had to do was embrace it, to accept the gift of the warp, and the galaxy would be his. At the very heart of this dark, seductive vision, Horus, the War Master, faced the ultimate temptation. The Chaos Gods offered him everything. Power beyond imagination. A future where he would not be a servant, but a ruler. A future where he would be hailed as a savior. The choice was his. And in that moment, broken by the vision of betrayal, by his own fear, and by his own buried, all-consuming ambition, Horus Lupercal made his fateful and final decision. He would betray the Emperor. In accepting the terrible, corrupting powers of chaos, Horus truly, genuinely, believed he was saving mankind. He convinced himself that the Emperor had failed, that the Imperium, left to his father's designs, would wither and decay into the very tyranny he had been shown. Only he, Horus, armed with the forbidden power of the warp, could prevent this grim, dark future. His loyalty to the Emperor, once so unshakable, so pure, was now twisted into a dark, iron resolve to overthrow him. Horus did not see himself as a traitor. In his own corrupted, prideful mind, he had become the true savior of humanity. He was the one who would prevent the Imperium's decline into dogma, tyranny, and decay. But in embracing chaos, Horus had not freed himself from the Emperor's control. He had, in his arrogance, become a puppet to far darker, more ancient, and more malevolent forces. He was manipulated from that moment on by the very gods who sought the downfall and the feast of all mankind. The War Master was no longer the Emperor's greatest son. He was now the chosen of chaos. And his fall would set the galaxy aflame. Horus's fall from grace was the turning point. It was the crack that would shatter the galaxy. The Brotherhood of the Primarchs, already strained by pride and jealousy, would soon shatter irrevocably. The Luna Wolves, the proud, peerless legion that had followed their War Master into countless, glorious battles, would be remade in his new, dark image. They would become his instruments of rebellion. The Great Crusade, once a shining symbol of unity, of reason, and of hope, would descend into a black, bloody, and fratricidal civil war. Brother would turn against brother, son against father, and the galaxy, in its entirety, would be plunged into the dark, bloody, and terrible days of the Horus Heresy. The fall of Horus to chaos did not occur in isolation. He was the linchpin, the greatest prize, but he was not the only one. The Primarchs, once the Emperor's mighty, shining sons and peerless generals, had always harbored their own doubts, their own dark ambitions, and their own deeply held personal grievances. With Horus's rebellion now ignited, a dark, secret fire, the Chaos Gods turned their gaze to other key figures among the Primarchs. They whispered their seductive promises of power, of freedom, of knowledge, or of vengeance to those who would listen. The Brotherhood, once the shining, adamantine cornerstone of the Imperium, was now fracturing piece by tragic piece. Fulgrim, the Phoenician, the Primarch of the Emperor's children, had always sought one thing: perfection. Perfection in all things. In beauty, in art, in war, and even in himself. The Chaos God Slainish, the Dark Prince of Excess, the god of sensation and obsession, found fertile, welcoming ground in Fulgrim's all-consuming vanity and his desperate desire for transcendence. Fulgrim was seduced not by a vision of tyranny, but by the promise of achieving an ultimate, divine perfection, a state of being far beyond what the Emperor, with his bland, rational limitations, could ever offer. In secret, corrupted by a demonic blade he had taken as a trophy, Fulgrim began worshipping Slainish, dragging his entire legion, the Emperor's children, into the same horrific spiral of decadence, depravity, and sensation-seeking madness. Then there was Angron, the Red Angel, the butchered, broken, and tormented leader of the World Eaters. Angron had been cursed long ago with the Butcher's nails. These were arcane, brutal implants hammered into his skull that drove him to states of uncontrollable, blinding madness and uncontrollable suicidal rage. Angron's hatred for the Emperor, his father, had festered, hot and raw, since the very day he was rescued. The Emperor had teleported him from his home world, Nuceria, forcing him to leave his enslaved, gladiator comrades behind to be slaughtered by their masters. He had never forgiven his father for this act of perceived, cold-hearted betrayal. Khorne, the Blood God, the Lord of Skulls, sensed Angron's all-consuming, unending fury. He did not need to seduce Angron. He merely offered him a purpose. He promised him eternal bloodshed, a chance to revel, forever, in the glorious slaughter, without the restraint, without the hypocrisy of the Emperor's civilized war. Angron's fall was not a choice. It was an inevitability. Soon, his legion, already known for their berserk, uncontrolled fury, became Khorne's favored, chosen warriors, indulging in their rage without remorse, screaming blood for the blood god. Mortarion, the grim, pale, and dour lord of the Death Guard, had always carried a deep, cold bitterness toward the Emperor. Raised on the deathly, poisoned, fog-choked world of Barbarous, he had come to believe that mankind could only survive through sheer, stubborn, joyless endurance. He despised the Emperor's psychic power, seeing it as weak, corrupting sorcery. Nurgle, the Lord of Decay, the god of plague and inevitable entropy, preyed upon this grim, fatalistic belief. Trapped in the warp by Horus's designs, his legion dying from a supernaturally engineered plague, Mortarion was offered a dark bargain. Nurgle offered him the power to save his legion, to free them from the ravages of war and pain and death. Nurgle's horrific blessings twisted the Death Guard. It turned them into a plague-ridden, bloated, undead force, immune to pain, immune to decay, but bound forever to the horrific, stagnant will of the Plague God. And finally, there was Lorgar Aurelian, the architect of the entire catastrophic treachery. Lorgar had always, desperately, seen the Emperor as a god. He was devastated, his soul hollowed out, when the Emperor rejected his worship and humiliated him by ordering the destruction of his perfect, devotional city. This rejection, this fatherly punishment had driven him, in his grief and rage, into the welcoming, appreciative arms of the Chaos Gods, gods whose praises he now sang, in earnest, in place of the Emperor's. It was Lorgar's word-bearers, led by his dark emissary, Erebus, who had first, so carefully, so patiently, sown the seeds of heresy in Horus's mind. Now Lorgar, his dark faith validated, fully embraced the powers of the warp. He became a dark apostle of chaos, leading his legion, not in a crusade of compliance, but in a crusade of terrible, zealous corruption. As Horus, the War Master, gathered his fallen brothers to his cause, the legions Astartes, the Emperor's finest creation, began to split. The once united Space Marine legions now faced a terrible internal schism. On one side, the Loyalists, those who remained faithful against all reason to the Emperor and the dream of the Imperium. On the other, the traitors, those who followed their primarchs, their genetic fathers, into damnation. The divide between loyalty and treachery tore through the ranks of the Space Marines. Brother turned on brother. Legions that had once fought, bled, and conquered side by side, now prepared for war against one another. Horus's rebellion, once a whisper in the dark, once a secret held in the heart of a single, tormented man, was now set to erupt in a torrent of blood and fire, in open, galaxy-consuming warfare. The first open, undeniable act of betrayal in the Horus Heresy unfolded on the desolate, gray world of Isstvan III. On the surface, it was a simple compliance action. Isstvan III was a planet that had defied Imperial authority, and the War Master was moving to crush it. But the real target was not the rebellious, doomed planet. It was the loyalist elements still lingering within the traitor legions themselves. Horus, now a cold, calculating, and corrupted strategist, knew he needed to purge his ranks. He needed to eliminate those Astartes who, he knew, would never follow him into open rebellion against the Emperor. He devised a brutal, efficient, and monstrous plan. He faked a campaign to bring Isstvan III into compliance. He selected by name the Astartes from his own Luna Wolves, from the Death Guard, from the Emperor's children, and from the World Eaters to lead the assault. Many of these chosen warriors, these heroes of the Great Crusade, remained fiercely, stubbornly loyal to the Emperor. They were unaware, as they boarded their drop pods, that they had been marked by their own primarchs for death. As the loyalist Space Marines, thousands upon thousands of them, landed on Isstvan III, they were greeted not with the cheers of a grateful, liberated populace, but with the harsh, sudden, undeniable reality of their betrayal. Horus, now fully, irrevocably committed to his treachery, unleashed a devastating, life-ending virus bombing upon the surface of the planet. The atmosphere of Isstvan III ignited. The Life-Eater virus engulfed the world in swirling, toxic firestorms and suffocating clouds of necrotic gas, killing billions instantly. The virus bombs were meant to wipe out all life, to reduce the loyalist, dissenting elements within his own legions to so much corrupted, melted ash. Yet by some miracle or some cruel twist of fate, a few hardy and stubborn Astartes survived. The loyalist forces, led by men like Captain Gardiel Loken of the Luna Wolves and Captain Saul Tarvitz of the Emperor's Children, fought desperately to hold their ground, even as the sky burned and the full, horrific truth of Horus's betrayal became clear. Against all odds, they established makeshift, desperate defenses in bunkers and shattered ruins, refusing to die, quietly, to their own brother's treachery. But the War Master's plans were merciless and thorough. He unleashed the full, unbridled force of his remaining, corrupted traitor legions upon the handful of survivors. Angron himself, his voice a roar of pure, blood-mad joy, led the World Eaters in a bloody, fratricidal ground assault, cutting down, with glee, those who had, only hours before, called him brother. The massacre of Isstvan III was the first great, open, bleeding wound of the war. The loyalists who died there, their names cursed as traitors by the very traitors who slew them, were the first victims of a conflict that would, in time, engulf the entire galaxy. Horus had shown his hand. There could be no turning back. No negociación, no surrender. The Great Crusade, the dream of a united mankind, had ended, and in its place, a new, terrible civil war reigned. As the garbled, horrified news of Horus's unthinkable treachery spread, the Imperium, reeling, responded. Loyalist legions, still true to their father, the Emperor, rallied to put down this monstrous, unbelievable rebellion. Horus, however, moved quickly, with all his strategic genius, to solidify his power. He knew that the strongest, most immediate opposition to his coup would come from the legions that remained stubbornly loyal. And so, he set another trap, a trap even more devastating, more ambitious, and more bloody than the one on Isstvan III. 3 full loyalist legions, the Raven Guard, the Iron Hands, and the Salamanders, led by their respective loyal Primarchs, Corvus Corax, Ferrus Manus, and Vulcan, made all haste to the Isstvan system. They sought to confront Horus, to bring him to justice on the blackened, virus-scorched world of Isstvan V. They believed, in their righteous fury, that they were going into battle to stop the traitors. In truth, they were walking blindly into an ambush. Horus had already, in secret, corrupted other Primarchs and their legions. Fulgrim's Emperor's Children, Mortarian's Death Guard, Perturabo's Iron Warriors, Lorgar's Word Bearers, and the enigmatic Alpha Legion had all, secretly, pledged their allegiance to the War Master. And Horus intended to use this, his hidden, terrible advantage, to its fullest. The Loyalist forces, blinded by their rage and their grief, launched their assault on the drop site, unaware of the full, terrifying scale of the betrayal that awaited them. As they fought their way, with grim determination, through the traitor defenses, they found themselves, suddenly, terribly, surrounded. The legions that had, moments before, seemed to be their allies, the Word Bearers, the Iron Warriors, and the Alpha Legion, revealed their true, dark allegiance. In an instant, the Loyalists were caught in a devastating, murderous crossfire. The drop site massacre was not a battle, it was a slaughter. The Loyalist legions, already battered and now utterly betrayed, were overwhelmed by the treachery of their supposed allies. Ferrus Manus, the Gorgon, the indomitable Primarch of the Iron Hands, fought with all his unyielding fury, but was ultimately cut down, his head taken as a trophy by Fulgrim, the brother he had once trusted, the brother he had once loved. The Raven Guard and the Salamanders suffered horrendous, crippling losses. Their forces were decimated, their legions shattered, by the combined, overwhelming might of the traitor legions. Vulcan, Primarch of the Salamanders, was thought lost in the battle, disappearing into the chaos, a captive of his own cruel-minded brothers. Corax of the Raven Guard barely escaped with his life, his legion, and his heart shattered. The betrayal at Isstvan V was a devastating turning point in the heresy. The Emperor's forces had been dealt a catastrophic, crippling blow. 3 of his most powerful, loyal legions were, for all intents and purposes, destroyed. And Horus, the War Master, now held the advantage. With the Loyalist legions crippled, his path to Terra was all but open. Horus and his allies, his dark, corrupted brotherhood, were free to continue their bloody march towards the throne world. The galaxy, once united under the Emperor's golden banner, now descended inexorably into chaos as world after world fell to the War Master's rebellion. The bonds of brotherhood were well and truly broken, and the Imperium, in its infancy, faced the greatest, most terrible threat in its long, bloody history. With the Dropsite massacre behind him, a bloody, smoking ruin, Horus wasted no time. His legions, now united in their dark purpose, moved with a ruthless, terrible efficiency, conquering world after world, carving a bloody sway through the heart of the Imperium. The Imperium, already reeling from the catastrophic blow at Isstvan, was now thrown into total, panicked disarray. The Loyalist legions, what remained of them, were scattered, their strength and their morale shattered. The War Master's forces marched, relentlessly, toward the heart of the Imperium, toward Terra, where the Emperor, his father, awaited, perhaps unaware, until it was too late, of just how close his favored, beloved son had come to bringing the entire Imperium to ruin. The road to Terra had been paved in just a few short, terrible years, with blood, with betrayal, and with an all-consuming corruption. Now the stage was set for the final, apocalyptic confrontation between father and son. As the galaxy itself trembled and burned under the weight of Horus's heresy, the Imperium's fate hung precariously in the balance. The Horus Heresy was more than just a war of conquest, more than a simple military rebellion. It was a deeply personal, deeply ideological battle, a spiritual cancer that tore apart the Emperor's most trusted, most powerful sons. The Primarchs, those demigods who had once been bound by a sacred brotherhood, now stood divided, irrevocably, between a bitter, desperate loyalty and a dark, seductive treachery. And their choices, their battles, would shape the destiny of the galaxy, far from the main thrust of Horus's advance. Robut Guilliman, the avenging son, the Lord of Ultramar, stood as a bastion of hope, reason, and order for the beleaguered Imperium. As the Primarch of the Ultramarines, Guilliman had long focused, not just on conquest, but on building. He had forged his realm of Ultramar into a domain of stability, of discipline, and of prosperity. It was a microcosm, a shining example of what the Emperor envisioned for the entire human race. When the garbled, nightmarish news of Horus's betrayal finally reached him, Guilliman was shocked, his logical mind struggling to process the sheer, irrational scale of the treachery. But he was, above all, resolute. He immediately, without hesitation, threw his full, considerable strength behind the Loyalist cause, marshaling his immense, disciplined legion and the vast, industrial resources of Ultramar. But the heresy, he would soon learn, would prove a devastating, personal test of his iron will, especially after the Battle of Kolth, where treachery would strike, not from a distant enemy, but from within his very own realm, at the heart of his legion. Guilliman remained loyal, a pillar of the Imperium. But the weight of the war, the sheer, bloody, fratricidal waste of it all, would lead him to question whether the Imperium, his father's dream, could ever truly recover, even if Horus were, by some miracle, defeated. Far across the galaxy, another son, Magnus the Red, stood upon the broken, burning earth of his home, Prospero. This world, this planet, had once been his sanctuary, a beacon of knowledge, of learning, and of psychic power. Now, the fires of betrayal and the savage, unending roar of battle filled the air. The 1,000 sons, his legion, fought desperately, hopelessly, against the tide of the space wolves, who had come, baying for blood, under the command of their Primarch, Leman Russ. The Emperor, in his rage, had ordered Russ to bring Magnus to heal, to bring him to Terra, to answer for his crimes. But the Wolf King, fueled by his own deep-seated hatred of sorcery, and by a cunningly worded, altered message from the War Master Horus, now sought something more. Final. He sought destruction. Prospero, once a shining jewel of enlightenment, now burned. The great libraries of the 1,000 Sons, crystal towers filled with millennia of arcane, forbidden, and precious learning, crumbled to ash. The skies, once clear and serene, now raged with unnatural storm clouds, as raw, untamed psychic energies tore at the very fabric of the planet. Magnus, the Crimson King, watching this terrible ruin unfold, felt the bitter, agonizing sting of betrayal. He had sought to warn the Emperor. He had seen Horus's fall. He had, in his arrogance, reached into the Imperium itself, using his forbidden sorcery to send a psychic message, a desperate warning, directly to his father on Terra. But in doing so, in his hubris, he had broken the one single command the Emperor had given him at the Council of Nikkei, never to use his sorcery. His psychic intrusion had shattered the Emperor's secret webway project, a blow from which the Imperium would never recover. And now, his father's punishment had come. Russ and his wolves, the Emperor's executioners, descended with a savage, joyous fury. But beneath their savagery lay a terrible, grim sense of duty. Leman Russ, though he despised all sorcery, had once, long ago, considered Magnus a brother. That brotherhood, like so many others, lay shattered now, in the dust of Tisca, Prospero's capital. In a battle of titans, of demigods, the two Primarchs met in the ruins of the burning city. Russ, the barbarian king, fought with a howling, earthly fury, every strike of his frost blade filled with the righteous, unbending weight of the Emperor's justice. Magnus, the Sorcerer King, fought with the raw, untamed power of the warp, his psychic power barely, desperately, containing the rage and the profound, soul-crushing sorrow that raged within him. In the end, it was Russ who struck the final, devastating blow. He broke Magnus' body, shattered his spine, and cast his screaming, psychic essence into the Imperium. Yet, Magnus did not die. He would not die. Broken, his world destroyed, his legion shattered, his heart consumed by the terrible, dawning realization that the Emperor had, in his eyes, forsaken him, Magnus turned, in his final, desperate moment, to the only power left to him. Chaos. The forces of Tsench, the architect of fate, the god of change, and sorcery, and broken-hearted ambition, reached out to the fallen, dying Primarch. They offer him a path to revenge, a path to survival. Magnus accepted, and with that single, whispered, desperate choice, the fate of the 1,000 Sons was sealed. The tragic irony, lost to all at the time, was that it was not the Emperor's intention for Russ to kill Magnus, or to destroy his legion. The Emperor's true, original order was simply to bring Magnus to him, so that he could answer for his profound, catastrophic disobedience. But Horus, the new master of deceit, armed with his newfound powers of chaos, had intercepted and warped the message to Russ, twisting its meaning, stoking the Wolf King's rage, making the Primarch believe that the Emperor wanted and demanded Magnus dead. A long, long way from that terrible, elemental bloodshed on Prospero, in the very heart of Guilliman's shining Ultramar, another colder, more calculated treachery unfolded. The Ultramarines, the Emperor's most numerous, most loyal, and most disciplined legion, had gathered on the world of Kolth to prepare for a new, joint crusade. They were led by Robut Guilliman himself, the very symbol of imperial order and strength. They were there to meet their allies, the Word Bearers. The Word Bearers, a legion once dedicated to spreading the Emperor's truth, were now, in secret, consumed by a new, dark, and terrible faith. Lorgar, their Primarch, had nurtured a festering, burning resentment toward the Emperor for long, long years. His devotion had been rejected, his faith scorned, and now he sought to bring the galaxy to worship, not the false, corpse Emperor, but the true, appreciative, powerful gods of chaos. At Kolth, his dark, meticulous plan took shape. Guilliman had believed the Word-Bearers came as allies, as brothers. But instead, they unleashed a storm of unimaginable, calculated destruction. With the opening, treacherous salvo, Kolth's skies darkened as the Word-Bearers' fleet opened fire, shattering the surface of the planet with orbital bombardments. Guilliman's warriors, the disciplined Ultramarines, were caught completely, terribly off guard. Yet they did not break. They fought fiercely to hold their ground, their discipline their only shield against the sudden, shocking betrayal. The battle raged, not on open fields, but in the burning, underground tunnels and amidst the shattered, irradiated cities of Kolth. The Ultramarines, though hardened by countless, straightforward campaigns, had never faced such a depth of treachery. The Word-Bearers, now infused with the dark, raw, forbidden power of chaos, fought with a zealous, terrifying fury that bordered on and often crossed into madness. Demons, summoned from the warp by Lorgar's dark apostles, manifested on the battlefield, turning the already brutal conflict into a living, screaming nightmare. Guilliman, ever the master tactician, his mind reeling but not broken, rallied his forces. The Ultramarines would not break. They would not be easily destroyed, even in the face of such overwhelming, unthinkable betrayal. But the Battle of Kolth was not merely a conflict of arms. It was a deep, spiritual blow to Guilliman's very sense of order, his belief in the rational, and his faith in the Imperium's fundamental unity. The betrayal of the Word-Bearers, of Lorgar, his brother, cut deep. It showed him, in no uncertain terms, the true, terrifying scale of the civil war that Horus had unleashed. Kolth, though devastated, would, in the end, stand. The Ultramarines would, eventually, purge their world of the traitorous Word-Bearers. But it was a hollow, Pyrrhic victory. The Ultramarines had lost brothers. They had lost worlds. And, in a way, they had lost a part of their soul, their faith on that burning, irradiated world. And the war, they knew, was only just beginning. Across the galaxy, in a shadowy, forgotten void of the Thramas sector, a different kind of war unfolded. A war, not of faith or reason, but of pure, abject terror and of bitter, bloody vengeance. The Night Lords, led by their fearsome, haunted, and increasingly deranged Primarch, Conrad Cuz, had descended upon the loyalist forces of the Dark Angels. The Thramas Crusade, as it would come to be known, was a war unlike any other in the Heresy. It was a war of grim, grinding attrition, fought across dozens of star systems, with no clear front line, no glorious battles, and no hope of quarter. Conrad Cuz, the Night Haunter, once a brutal, terrifying enforcer of Imperial law, had now, in the shadow of the Heresy, fully, joyfully, embraced the darkness within him. The Night Lords, his legion, followed him eagerly into his madness, reveling in the uncut, unrestrained fear and cruelty they were now allowed to inflict. They did not seek victory through conquest. They sought it through terror. Planets were not conquered. They were razed, their populations flayed and crucified, left as grim warnings. Entire systems were left in smoking, silent ruin. The Dark Angels, under the command of their own enigmatic and cold-hearted Primarch, Lionel Johnson, responded with a calculated, ruthless precision. But they found themselves, time and again, at odds with the Night Lord's savage, unpredictable guerrilla tactics. As the long, bloody war dragged on, Conrad Cuz's mental state deteriorated completely. His dark, prophetic visions of doom and his fatalistic obsession with his own preordained fate drove him deeper and deeper into the abyss of madness. He had always believed, since his youth, that he and his legion were doomed, that their brutal, savage methods would one day be condemned by the emperor he so desperately and fearfully wanted to please. Now, in the fires of the heresy, that dark belief became a terrible, self-fulfilling prophecy. Conrad Cuz fought, not to win the war, not to aid Horus, but to prove the righteousness of his own inevitable fall. The lion, ever the cold, calculating tactician, sought to bring Cuz to a single, decisive, honorable battle. But the Night Haunter, in his madness, was a ghost. He evaded him at every turn. The Great Crusade became a war of shadows, of ghosts and monsters, where neither side could gain the upper, decisive hand for long. The Dark Angels, disciplined, relentless, and unyielding, pushed the Night Lords back, system by bloody system. But it was at a terrible, brutal cost. Every victory seemed hollow, for the Night Lords left nothing but ash, bone, and devastation in their wake. In the end, the Great Crusade would leave both legions deeply, permanently scarred. The Dark Angels, though technically victorious, were haunted by the brutal, savage tactics they had been forced to adopt in order to counter the Night Lords' campaign of pure terror. Conrad Cuz, slipping further and further into his own personal madness, fled into the void, his dark fate, as he had always known, intertwined forever with the shadows he had once, so briefly, sought to master. Thus, the civil war, the Horus Heresy, raged on with no clear or clean end in sight. The Emperor's sons, once united in a glorious, galaxy-spanning purpose, now tore that very galaxy apart, each one driven by their own twisted and tragic visions of justice, of betrayal, and of doom. The Horus Heresy had begun, and the Imperium of man would never, ever be the same again. Horus, the War Master, once the favored, shining son of the Emperor, now stood at the head of a vast, dark, and terrible army of traitors. From every dark, burning corner of the galaxy, the traitor primarchs and their corrupted, roaring armies gathered. They were bound, no longer by brotherhood, but by a singular, dark, and all-consuming purpose: to bring the Imperium of man to its knees. And their target, their final, ultimate prize, was Terra, the cradle of humanity, the throne world, the seat of the Emperor's power. It awaited them, its defenses formidable, its heart defiant, but not, they knew, invincible. The War Master's forces numbered in the millions. Legions of corrupted, hate-filled space marines. Traitor titans, their god-machine spirits twisted into demonic mockeries. And countless, unnumbered, screaming, warp-spawned horrors marched and sailed in unison. Leading them were the twisted, monstrous remnants of the once proud, once noble legions. The Sons of Horus, the new, dark name for the Luna Wolves. The blood-crazed World Eaters. The bloated, pestilent Death Guard. The depraved, ecstatic Emperor's children. And all the other, broken, zealous sons who had cast aside their loyalty, their oaths, and their very humanity. Each brought its own, unique, terrible madness to the war. Angren's berserkers, bloated with the rage of Khorne. Mortarian's plague-ridden, tireless legions, spreading disease and despair. Fulgrim's devotees, lost in their endless, horrific pursuit of excess. They converged on Terra, a black, inexorable tide, guided by Horus's indomitable, corrupted will and a singular, burning desire to usurp the Emperor, to tear him down from his golden throne. These traitor legions, now fully united under Horus, had become an unstoppable, crashing wave of corruption, of death, and of all-consuming, dark ambition. With the galaxy burning in flames behind them, they now turned their collective, baleful gaze toward their ultimate prize, Terra, the seat of the Emperor's power. the heart of the Imperium. This was where Horus, the War Master, planned to end the war, once and for all. The War Master's forces, bolstered by the dark, raw power of chaos, and by the full, combined might of 9 traitorous space marine legions, advanced relentlessly toward the Sol system, humanity's home. Planet after planet, system after system, fell, leaving a burning, smoking trail of devastation in their wake. As the traitor legions gathered their full, terrible might, the galaxy itself trembled. Perturabo, the Lord of Iron, and his Iron Warriors, the undisputed masters of siege warfare, prepared, with a cold, grim satisfaction, to tear down the very walls of Terra. Angron and his berserk, roaring world eaters thirsted for the ultimate bloody slaughter, while Mordorion and his Death Guard carried their plagues, their corruption, and their despair across every world they touched. The Emperor's children, led by the twisted, demonic Fulgrim, reveled in their depravity, eager to defile the most sacred, most holy halls of the Imperial Palace. Even the enigmatic, shadowy Alfarius and his Alpha Legion operated from the darkness, destabilizing the Imperial defenses with sabotage, with assassination, and with crippling, confusing deception. As the traitor legions approached, Terra, the throne world, prepared for war. Rogel Dorn, the Praetorian of Terra, the unyielding, stoic Primarch of the Imperial Fists, had been tasked by the Emperor himself with fortifying the home world. With a methodical, grim, and mathematical precision, Dorn oversaw the construction of a defense so vast, so deep, so layered, that would test even the overwhelming might of the traitor forces. Walls were raised, gun emplacements the size of mountains were positioned. Entire sectors of Terra, once teeming with life, were turned into barren, pre-sighted kill zones. The Imperial Palace itself, a continent-sized monument to the Emperor's glory, became a fortress. Its ancient, beautiful walls were reinforced with new, thick layers of adamantium and ceramite. Its soaring towers bristled with cannons, and its skies shimmered with the power of countless, overlapping void shields. Yet for all his preparations, for all his cold, logical planning, Dorn knew the grim, unassailable truth. This would be a war of attrition. The traitors' numbers were, for all intents and purposes, overwhelming. And while the Loyalist forces, his own Imperial Fists, were determined to fight to the last man, they were quite simply, vastly, hopelessly outnumbered. The Imperial Fists, alongside the bloodied, battered remnants of other Loyalist legions, the White Scars, the Blood Angels, stood ready. But the true numerical strength of the Imperial defenders lay in the countless, unnumbered regiments of the Astra Militarum, the Imperial Army, and the ranks of battle-hardened, desperate planetary militia. These were not the elite, superhuman warriors of the Adeptus Astartes. They were just men and women, fighting with lost guns and bayonets against the demigods and demons of their own shattered Imperium. But they fought with the same unwavering, unbending resolve. They fought knowing with a terrible, absolute certainty that if Terra fell, the Imperium would fall. And if the Imperium fell, all of humanity would fall with it. Horus's fleet arrived in the Sol system like a plague of locusts, tearing through the outer, token defenses in a storm of fire and blood and dark, demonic energy. Mars, the Forge world, the sister planet of Terra, had long since fallen into open, bloody rebellion. Its once loyal Mechanicum was now split, torn between those who still served the Emperor, the Omnicia, and those who had pledged their souls to the Dark Mechanicum, to Horus, and to the powers of chaos. The traitors, now in control of the massive, orbital shipyards of Mars, used them to launch wave after wave after wave of warships and landers toward Terra. On the surface of the throne world, the tension mounted, becoming a palpable, physical thing. The skies themselves darkened, choked with the incoming orbital storm of the traitor forces. The siege of Terra had begun. As the battle for the very soul of humanity loomed, the Loyalist legions, what was left of them, reeled from their mounting, terrible personal losses. Ferrus Manus, the indomitable, iron-willed Primarch of the Iron Hands, had been among the first to fall. His death at the Dropsite Massacre was a bitter, shocking blow to the Loyalist cause. Ferrus had fought, as he always did, with a cold, brutal fury that mirrored the unyielding, mechanical strength of his legion. But his drive for vengeance, his all-consuming rage at his brother's betrayal, had led him blindly into a deadly, waiting trap during the massacre on Isstvan V. There, on that black, smoking plain, he had faced his former, beloved brother, Fulgrim, in single, desperate combat. Ferrus, his iron heart filled with a righteous, burning wrath, believed, in his arrogance, that he could bring Fulgrim back from the brink, that his once noble brother, his closest friend, could be saved from the dark, insidious clutches of chaos. But Ferrus had been wrong. Fulgrim, now a twisted, monstrous, demonic reflection of the perfection he had once so desperately sought, struck down Ferrus, his brother, with a dark, cursed, demonic blade gifted to him by the dark gods. The Loyalist Primarch's head, his iron-willed, noble head, had rolled unceremoniously in the bloody dirt. A terrible, grim symbol of the ruin that awaited all of the Emperor's sons. The Iron Hands, shattered, broken, and now, forever, leaderless, withdrew from Isstvan, their profound, bottomless grief turning instantly into a cold, unrelenting, and eternal hatred for all traitors. The death of Ferrus Manus left an indelible, gaping scar on the Imperium. His brothers, the remaining loyal Primarchs, felt the loss deeply, personally. For Rogel Dorn, it was a cold, hard reminder of the terrible fragility of their cause, that even the strongest, the most indomitable among them, could fall. Vulcan and Corax, who had also fought and bled and barely survived Isstvan, mourned the death of their brother, their friend. But they could not afford to grieve for long. The war, the terrible, bloody war, continued, and each new loss only deepened their dark, grim resolve. Yet the losses, the terrible, personal losses, did not stop with Ferrus. As the war and the traitor fleet drew ever closer to Terra, Sanguinius, the angelic, noble Primarch of the Blood Angels, carried the terrible, crushing weight of a prophecy. It was a vision, a dark, inescapable foretelling, one that foretold, with absolute, terrible clarity, his own unavoidable death at the hands of his most beloved brother, Horus. Sanguinius, ever the noble, ever the selfless, perfect leader, had not spoken of this dark, personal vision to his brothers. He would not burden them with his own selfish doom. Yet it hung over him a dark, heavy, suffocating shadow. His legion, the Blood Angels, fought with an unmatched, desperate ferocity, their own secret genetic flaw, the Black Rage, driving them to acts of unparalleled, suicidal heroism and savage, terrible brutality. But Sanguinius, their angel, knew that his end was coming, and the burden of that certain, terrible knowledge weighed heavily on his pure, untainted soul. The death of Ferrus Manus and the looming, certain doom of Sanguinius were emblematic of the greater, overwhelming tragedy of the Horus Heresy. The Emperor's sons, his demigods, who had once fought side by side to bring glorious unity to the galaxy, were now, in a fit of pride and rage and jealousy, tearing that very galaxy apart. Every death, every betrayal, was not just a loss of life or a strategic setback. It was a loss of hope. It was one final, irrevocable step closer to the end of the beautiful, impossible dream the Emperor had once envisioned for all of humanity. Within the deep, impenetrable, golden halls of the Imperial Palace, the Emperor himself sat, immobile, upon the golden throne. His mind, his vast, powerful, psychic mind, was consumed by a different war. A war far beyond the material realm. He had withdrawn, long ago, from the direct, day-to-day command of the Imperium, trusting his sons, his generals, to carry out the defense of Terra, his throne world, in his place. Malcador the Sigillite, his most trusted, most ancient, and perhaps his only human friend, acted as the steward, the regent of the Imperium. But even Malcador, wise and ancient and powerful as he was, could feel the crushing, terrible weight of the Emperor's physical absence. The Emperor, in his silence, faced a dilemma, a choice, unlike any other he had ever faced. He knew, with his prophetic foresight, that Horus, his son, was the key, that the War Master's fall, his corruption, had ignited the conflict that now engulfed and threatened to consume the entire galaxy. Yet, Horus was not just a traitor. He was the Emperor's son. He was his most beloved, most favored, most perfect creation. To confront Horus, he knew, would mean killing him, utterly and finally destroying him. And that was a burden the Emperor, the father, had long, desperately hoped to avoid. But the war, this terrible, bloody, demonic war, had grown far beyond even his control. And the Emperor knew, with a cold, grim certainty, that the time would come soon when he would have to face his fallen, broken son. In the deepest, most secret, most guarded depths of the Imperial Palace, the Emperor, on his golden throne, labored tirelessly on his secret project, the Webway. It was his grand, secret plan, a plan to free humanity forever from the dangers and the temptations of warp travel, to create a new, stable, safe, human-controlled network that would allow the Imperium to move instantly through the galaxy without ever risking the taint of chaos corruption. But the project, catastrophically damaged by Magnus' psychic intrusion, was incomplete. And as the war, the heresy, consumed more and more of his attention, of his power, the Emperor realized with a cold, terrible finality that the Webway might never be finished. His greatest work, his true, lasting hope for humanity, would remain a dream. A broken, unfulfilled, and tragic dream. Malcador, his ever-loyal regent, saw the cracks, the real, tangible cracks, beginning to form within the Imperium. The strain of the war, the isolation, the silence of the Emperor, the fracturing, paranoid loyalty among the remaining, scattered, loyalist legions. All of it was pushing the Imperium to the very brink of total, irreversible collapse. Even among the staunchest, most unbending loyalists, whispers of dissent, of doubt, had begun to fester. Some, in their fear, questioned why the Emperor had withdrawn, why he had left his sons, his mortal armies, to fight and die, while he remained safe and confined to his golden throne. Others, like the stoic, faithful Rogel Dorn, understood, or at least accepted, that the Emperor was focused on matters of psychic importance, far beyond their mortal comprehension. But the doubt festered nonetheless. As the traitorous forces, the black, screaming tide of Horus's ambition, closed ever and ever closer on Terra, the Emperor's dilemma grew ever more pressing, ever more agonizing. He knew that the fate of all humanity rested squarely on his shoulders. But to secure that fate, he realized he might have to sacrifice everything, even the lives of his most loyal, most beloved sons. The path to Terra was paved with death, with ruin, and with the ghosts of broken brotherhoods. And the final, terrible, unavoidable reckoning between the Emperor and his fallen, broken, favored son loomed ever closer. The siege of Terra raged like a psychic, elemental storm, one that had gathered over the planet for a decade. The traitor legions, a tide of pure, undiluted hate, crashed upon the walls of the Imperial Palace like a relentless, bloody ocean. Every tower, every wall, every trench, every gilded hall was a battlefield. The very air itself trembled and screamed under the unending weight of the war. Millions upon millions of mortals and Astartes and demons fought and died in the long, dark shadow of the Emperor's throne. The defense, led by the grim, unyielding Rogel Dorn, stood firm. But the might of the enemy, of his own fallen brothers, was overwhelming. Angron, the Red Angel, the blood-mad, was the very embodiment of mindless, berserk destruction. The new demonic primarch of the World Eaters, now a towering, monstrous, red-skinned beast, tore through the Imperial forces with an unholy, unstoppable fury. His berserk, mindless rage was boundless. His twin, roaring chain axes cleaved without effort through the ranks of human soldiers and loyalist space marines alike. No defense, no wall, no mortal-made barrier could hold against him. Wherever Ongron went, only smoking, bloody ruin followed. Entire battalions of Dorne's own, stoic, Imperial fists and their loyal, desperate allies were slaughtered, butchered, before they could even raise their weapons. Ongron had become a living, screaming, roaring avatar of Khorne's wrath. His bloodlust, his unending pain, feeding the madness that had, so long ago, consumed him. Rogal Dorne, the master of defense, knew, with a cold, logical certainty, that facing Ongron directly would be suicide. Instead, he deployed every resource, every gun, every last, desperate man he had to slow the Red Angel's advance. Gun emplacements, orbital strikes, and even desperate, suicidal, melt-a-bomb squads of space marines were sent in waves to blunt his terrible, roaring rampage. Still, it felt to the defenders like trying to stop an earthquake, a force of nature with their bare hands. Terra's defenders fell back, and back, and back, bleeding and dying for every single sacred inch of ground they surrendered. Dorne himself, his golden armor stained with the blood of his own fallen sons, fought with a grim, terrible resolve, knowing that each minute, each second he bought time for the Emperor's final, unseen, desperate stand. While Ongron led the brute, mindless, bloody force of the assault, his brother, Perturabo, the Lord of Iron, guided the cold, calculating, strategic genius behind the siege. The Primarch of the Iron Warriors, bitter and brilliant, had been planning this moment, this ultimate act of defiant, spiteful deconstruction, since the very beginning of the heresy. His legion, the undisputed experts in all forms of siege warfare, were unmatched, peerless in the cold, grim art of breaking defenses. Perturabo's vast, dark, mechanicum-forged siege engines and his unending, mathematically precise artillery rained a storm of unrelenting destruction on the palace's walls day and night, weakening the fortress inch by bloody, painstaking inch. He had devised intricate, overlapping strategies, coordinating his and his brother's assaults with a cold, terrifying precision that left no room for error, no room for hope. The Iron Warriors, cold, grim, and emotionless in their singular, dark purpose, systematically and joylessly tore down the very defenses that had, just a decade before, seemed so utterly, so laughably impregnable. Despite the overwhelming, impossible, hopeless odds, the Loyalists fought. They fought with the raw, primal desperation of those defending not just their lives, not just their homes, but the very last flickering hope for the future of humanity. The Adeptus Custodes, the Emperor's own personal golden armored guard, stood alongside the bloody, battered remnants of the Imperial fists, the White Scars, and the Blood Angels. Their golden armor, once a symbol of glorious parades, now glinted dully in the endless, choking fires of the battle. A last, tiny, flickering symbol of the Emperor's light, even as the all-consuming darkness of chaos closed in inexorably around them. Every Loyalist soldier, from the meanest, last-gun-wielding conscript to the noblest, most powerful Astartes, knew in their bones that if they failed, if they broke, Terra would fall. And if Terra fell, the galaxy and all of mankind would be lost forever to the howling, screaming, laughing abyss of war. As the siege dragged on for long, bloody, sunless weeks, breaches, terrible, gaping wounds began to form in the outer and then the inner walls of the Imperial Palace. Perturabo's relentless, grinding siege lines advanced. The traitor legions, roaring in triumph, poured through the gaps, like blood from a mortal wound. The battle shifted from the towering, shattered walls to the very sacred, marble-lined, golden heart of the palace itself. In the inner sanctum, the Sanctum Imperialis Rogel Dorn, his face a mask of grim, exhausted duty, made his final, desperate preparations. The war, he knew, had reached its last, bloody, final phase. And the Emperor, his father, his master, would soon at last face his ultimate, terrible challenge. Above the burning, weeping world of Terra, the vengeful spirit, Horus's massive, corrupted flagship, loomed like a dark, bloody, triumphant omen. The War Master's eyes, now no longer human, but pools of raw, burning, chaotic energy, fully consumed by the malice and the power of the dark gods, turned toward the planet below. He knew, with a godlike, arrogant certainty, that the end was near, that the Emperor, his father, would come to him. All the destruction, all the blood, all the betrayal, it had all led inexorably to this single, final, galaxy-defining moment. The final, terrible reckoning between father and son, as the traitor legions, screaming his name, breached the final, golden defenses of the inner palace. Sanguinius, the angel, the Primarch of the Blood Angels, received a final, clear, terrible vision of his fate. He had always known, in his heart, that this moment would come. With his great white angelic wings and his shining golden armor, he soared, a single, defiant, beautiful star, up, towards the vengeful spirit, knowing with an absolute tragic certainty that his death awaited him there. Sanguinius was the Emperor's angel. He was the paragon of nobility, of virtue, of hope. But even he could not escape the terrible, unavoidable doom laid out before him. He landed, a defiant blaze of gold, on the corrupted, screaming, demonic deck of the vengeful spirit. And there, in the oppressive, suffocating shadow of Horus's dark, raw, chaotic power, he confronted the War Master. Horus stood waiting for him. He was no longer the brother Sanguinius had once known, had once loved. Horus was now a vessel, a towering, monstrous, empowered vessel of pure, unadulterated chaos. His form, twisted, bloated, and dark, crackling with the raw, dark power of the gods. Yet, even in his terrible, absolute corruption, a tiny, flickering, human part of Horus remembered. He remembered the bond, the true, deep, brotherly love he had once shared with Sanguinius, his noblest, purest brother. For a brief, agonizing, infinitesimal moment, the War Master, the demigod of chaos, hesitated. His gaze, his burning, demonic gaze, flickered with the dim, forgotten human memory of their brotherhood. But it was only a moment. Horus attacked with all the raw, unbound, terrible fury of the warp itself. The duel between them, between the angel and the demon, was swift and brutal and hopelessly one-sided. Sanguinius, though one of the greatest, most peerless warriors among all the Primarchs, was no match, could never be a match for the new, dark, godlike power that Horus now wielded. The War Master, with a terrible, weeping, roaring cry, crushed the life from him. He broke his body with a single, devastating, brutal strike. Sanguinius, the angel, the light of the Imperium, fell. His noble, perfect golden form shattered, broken, and lifeless at Horus's corrupted, trembling feet. With the death of Sanguinius, the Emperor, far below, felt the psychic tremor, the snuffing out of that bright, pure, loyal light in the warp. His most loyal, most beloved, most perfect son, the one who had stood beside him, unwavering since the very beginning, was gone. The Emperor could wait no longer. He gathered his custodes. He gathered his last, loyal sons. And in a blaze of desperate, golden light, they teleported directly to the vengeful spirit. The Emperor found Horus on the ship's bridge, a twisted, demonic mockery of its former glory. He found him standing, triumphant, over the broken, shattered, beautiful body of Sanguinius. The sight of his fallen, murdered son brought a wave of pure, psychic, agonizing sorrow. But there was no time, not anymore, for grief. The Emperor stepped forward, his own golden, blazing light, a stark, defiant contrast to the ship's demonic gloom. He knew that this final, terrible confrontation would decide the fate of all humanity. Horus, his voice dripping with contempt, with arrogance, with the power of the dark gods, called out to the Emperor. The War Master's hubris was boundless, absolute. He believed himself now invincible. He believed the dark, fickle gods had made him more powerful than even his father, the Emperor. The duel between them began with a clash of psychic and physical power that sent shockwaves, not just through the ship, but through the Imperium itself. Horus attacked with all the raw, untamed, screaming power of chaos. His blows, his thoughts, his very will were imbued with the collective, ancient, terrible strength of the dark gods themselves. The Emperor, though unmatched in all of creation in his own power, hesitated. Even now, even after all the betrayal, all the blood, all the death, even as Horus struck again and again and again, the Emperor, the father, could not bring himself to destroy his beloved, his favored, his broken son. He sought, even now, at the end of all things, to save Horus, to strip the corruption from him, to find the small, flickering light of the man he had once known buried deep within the monster. But Horus, lost utterly to the madness, the power of chaos, saw this hesitation, this fatherly love, as weakness. With a final, terrible, merciless, triumphant strike, Horus landed a blow that shattered the Emperor's golden armor and wounded him grievously, mortally. As the Emperor, his body broken, lay wounded, dying, Horus prepared, with a gloating, dark satisfaction, to deliver the final, killing blow. But in that moment, that tiny, fractional, triumphant moment, something changed. The dark gods, sensing the Emperor's imminent death, sensing their final, total, absolute victory was at hand, began, in their fickle, arrogant, greedy haste, to withdraw their support from Horus, to claim their prize for themselves. For the briefest, most infinitesimal instant, the War Master, his mind suddenly, shockingly, clear of their demonic influence, was himself again. He was free from their influence. And in that one tiny, terrible moment of clarity, he saw what he had become. He saw the ruin, the blood, the horror he had wrought. He saw the body of Sanguinius. He saw his father, broken and dying at his feet. And in that moment, he knew regret. The Emperor, his own vast, psychic mind, seizing that one tiny, fleeting moment of clarity of his son's return, unleashed his full, unbridled, godlike power. With a single, devastating, psychic blow, a scream of pure, agonizing parental grief and loss and power, he obliterated Horus. The War Master's body was reduced to ash. His soul, his very essence, was destroyed utterly, leaving nothing, not even a whisper for the dark, hungry, waiting gods to claim. But the victory, if it could be called that, came at a terrible, terrible cost. The Emperor, his body broken, his spirit bleeding, mortally wounded, collapsed. His loyal, weeping, golden-armored warriors rushed to his side. But it was clear, with a terrible, dawning horror, that even the master of mankind could not survive this wound. In his final, agonizing, mortal moments, the Emperor gave his last command, that his broken, dying, physical form be placed upon the golden throne, where his vast, psychic power, his unbroken, indomitable will, would sustain the Imperium, light the Astronomicon, and hold back forever the howling, triumphant tides of chaos. The siege of Terra was over. Horus was dead. The traitor legions, their dark god, their leader, their very will, suddenly, inexplicably gone broke. Leaderless, and in a state of sudden, panic disarray, they fled, scrambling, back to the dark, gaping, laughing maw of the warp. But the Emperor's dream, his beautiful, shining, golden dream of a united, rational, enlightened galaxy, had died with him. The Imperium would survive, but it would be a shadow, a dark, grim, gothic, monstrous shadow of what it once was. It would become a realm of eternal, unending, desperate war, held together, not by hope or reason or progress, but by the sheer, agonizing, undying, psychic will of a dying, broken, and silent God.